let's have a little bit of a broader discussion here about how the BDS movement is relevant to the environmental movement, and why the Green Party in the United States has picked it up, as well as why it's very disappointing to see the Green Party in Canada, or at least the leader of the Green Party in Canada, step away from it. It's actually good to see the party embracing a social justice position along those lines. This is an article at a magazine called Forward. It's a Jewish, a left-leaning Jewish paper. I don't know a lot about the paper. Just glancing through it seems like it's a left-leaning Jewish-focused North American paper. It seems like it's headquartered in the States, and the article kind of, I'm just trying to get a bit of an explanation across for the people that wrote the article to get some better context. I will do that from time to time. I will act as an ambassador to Canada for an unelected ambassador to Canada, or ambassador to the U.S., I should say, regarding certain media stories, right? Because you run across them and it's just like, you guys are missing something, right? So what I'm saying is you can't understand this in a vacuum. First, the Green Party in Canada was, up until this point, a very unstable coalition of conservatives, right-libertarians, primitivists, and environmentalists. They didn't have many leftists. Okay? They just didn't. It was not a leftist. I mean, we think of the Green Party as on the left, but it was more like they were like an old Tory party. I've tried to explain this previously. It's a rant unto itself. But it may appear very left-wing to your average American, but that's because they don't really understand the historical British spectrum and what a conservative means historically in the British Empire. May herself is a progressive conservative, which was what became of the Tories in the middle part of the last century. The Conservative Party in Canada has been very volatile. It collapsed in the 90s and turned into the Reform Party. We forget that it had collapsed earlier and turned into the PC Party. And it may end up collapsing sometime again soon. Because the whole Reform, it's an unstable coalition. And it seems like the Liberal Party is doing a very good job at controlling the old progressive side of the Conservative Party, which were always called Red Tories. May was a Red Tory, which nowadays is a junior leadership branch of the Liberal Party. She claims BDS is a distraction without acknowledging the fact that she's pro-life. Let's stop for a second and be clear. She's pro-life is a hugely unnecessary issue on the Canadian left and is massively restricting their ability to gain voters. I'd be rich if you gave me a quarter for every leftist I've met that has pointed to her pro-life stance as a reason they can't vote for her. On top of that, they tend to run these market fundamentalists that are clueless about the Green Party platform and think the answer is more property rights. Ideas that are strongly on the libertarian right. Meaning that if you're looking at the Green Party from a distance, they kind of sound more like Ron Paul than they do like Jill Stein. It's the truth of it, okay? And then, they wonder why they can't break through on the Canadian left. Well, it's less your platform. Your platform actually looks pretty good. It's more the people that you've got running your party. So, I mean, it's got to make a break, right? It can't continue to try to, straddle this line between the environmental left and the libertarian right. It's completely unstable. It has to fall apart. And, it's going to have to move in one direction or the other. Either it can become a libertarian, a right-wing libertarian party, or it can move off, into this direction of green anarchism, the environmental left. The kind of thing that Naomi Klein has been talking about, right? In Canada, there's not enough right-wing libertarians to seriously staff and run a party like this. There are enough leftists. But right now, they're mostly tied into the NDP, which is the mainstream left-wing party in Canada. As it turns out, the Canadian left is currently in extreme flux, though, because the NDP just really damaged itself very badly in the last election. It ran a campaign on balanced budgets. And I need to be clear that they were very aggressive in promising that they will not run a deficit. What did he say? He said, running a deficit is not even an option. And in the Canadian political spectrum, that is an extremely right-wing position. They took that position because they were trying to appeal to red Tories, like Elizabeth May. But it ended up backfiring badly because the Liberals responded to that by saying that they'll run deficits. And Canadians don't really care. Like, broadly speaking, I mean, there's conservatives in Canada, but most Canadians do not care if there's a budget deficit at all. And to the extent that we kind of grudgingly realize that we gotta kind of play by some rules, it's like it's like we have to play by the rules that are set by the investors groups outside the country, right? So, I mean, there was a problem in the 90s where you had these international investors consortiums that were cutting our credit rating, and the World Bank was threatening to swoop in and all these kind of things. And we had to step back and say, whoa, we can't run deficits forever. We got to do something about this, right? But the problem got fixed. Our GDP to debt ratio is very good, and there's no reason why we can't just spend whatever we want, really, right? So having the leader of the party that's supposed to be on the left come up and say that they're going to run balanced budgets in a period where there was no reason why they had to, other than to appeal to the right. And then the centrist party, I call them center-right here. Some people will call them center-left. They're pretty much dead center in Canada, but they do tend to lean a little right. Relative to the Canadian spectrum, they tend to lean a little right. Relative to the American spectrum, they're to the left of the Green Party, right? And on most issues, BDS is one of those issues where the Liberals are actually very pro-Israel, right? But I call them center-right. Most places, liberal means right-wing, right? Because there's a socialist movement. The United States is kind of unique in that sense, that there's no socialist movement, right? But in Canada, we do have socialists, and liberal means, center to center-right, like it does in most of the world. And they said they're going to run, they're going to run deficits. Why not? The debt to GDP ratio is good. And the left just cratered, right? This time last year, August of last year, the NDP actually looked like they were going to win. By the time the election came around in October, they'd lost like half of their... In fact, I believe it was more than half of their caucus. And today they're running at around 10% of the polls. They've lost 3/4 of their support over the last year. Relative to this time last year, 3/4 of the people that said they were going to vote for the NDP are now saying that they'll vote for the Liberals. And there's really only one dominant reason for it. It's because the Liberals promised that they'll focus on the spending requirements that are needed, right? We have infrastructure needs. We have, and a part of that was actually green infrastructure. Converting wastewater plants, transit options, these kinds of things. That's a big part of their spending platform. They said we're gonna spend money, right? And the NDP said we're gonna balance budgets. We saw a role reversal. And the media will try to talk about other things because we have a Tory media in Canada, and they can't deal with it, right? If you look at media reports from this time last year, from last summer, everybody was talking about how, or everybody in the mainstream media in Canada was talking about how this was a smart move by the NDP to move into the center and talk about balanced budgets and be more responsible, right? I may have been the only person in the whole country that was like, no, you idiots. And I yelled and I screamed. Okay, and the Liberals made the smart choice. They came out and they said, no, we're not going to balance the budget, we're going to spend. And they had massive political gains from that, and the media still won't acknowledge it. They want to talk about some kid in Syria, or there was a debate about niqabs. When, if you actually look at the numbers, the Conservatives were pretty much flat all the way through the election, right? You don't have to come up with factors about where the Conservative vote went, because the Conservative vote didn't change at all. The Conservative vote was flat from the summer all the way through to the election. There was no shift in Conservative support. The shift in support came from, on the left, like I say, 3/4, not at election time, it was more like half. And it was about half. Roughly half of the people that said they were going to vote for the NDP in August voted for the Liberals in October. And today that number is at 3/4. And it's entirely because of the budget. Ignore the media. They don't want to have this discussion because they hate the fact that Canadians don't care about fiscal conservatism, because the media is Tory and they want to cram fiscal conservatism down your throat, right? So the NDP got triangulated badly by the center-right Liberals as a consequence of this. In the end, like I say, the conventional wisdom told them that this was a smart move, moving into the mushy middle, which, it's like, the guy that wrote that book was a political science professor from South Carolina. What the fuck does he know about Canadian politics? I could have told you 10 years ago that he was an idiot. And the fact that all of the parties bought into it is just, it's a sad reflection on the Canadian political spectrum, okay? But thankfully the Liberals were the party that finally broke and said, okay, we're gonna... And we see the result of it. Huge, huge success. But now the NDP, now that the dust has settled, the NDP is not bringing support back. In fact, they're continuing to lose support. People are still moving from the NDP to the Liberals. The NDP are now in disarray. They lost their leader. There's nobody really in sight. Nobody even wants to run for them, right? They're in a bad situation. They're in a free fall that they may actually not recover from. Okay. A year ago, a lot of people were suggesting that it was the Liberals that were dead, and it did look like they were dead. And the reason why it looked like they were dead was that they were leaning too far to the right. But miraculously for the Liberal Party, the NDP, instead of taking advantage of that, actually emulated their error. And now it's a year later, and the party that's dead is not the Liberals, it's the NDP, right? They stepped in front of the bullet, they followed them into fire, use your analogy. But the death the certain death that seemed to be the Liberal Party's obvious fate now seems attached to the NDP, because all of the problems that the Liberals were having have been inherited by the NDP due to their foolishness, and specifically the foolishness of their leader. And all of the errors that they made are now attached to them. All of the errors that the Liberals have made are now attached to the NDP. And all of the positivity that the NDP appeared to be building has now transferred over to the Liberals. Because the conventional wisdom was wrong. And I was right. It wasn't going to be the party that moved closer to the center that was going to win that fight on the left. It was going to be the party that moved further to the left. And frustratingly, there are signs, and I've been trying to point them out, that the Liberal Party is repeating the mistakes that it had made before the election cycle. Which is going to open up, which is going to fracture the left again. It's not as easy as saying, you fooled us again. Nobody was fooled. It's just that the NDP were worse. You know? Nobody on the left in Canada was tricked into thinking that Liberals were all of a sudden, this great left-wing party. It was just obvious that whatever the problems with the Liberals were, the NDP have become not just as bad, but worse than them. And so the Liberals became the lesser of two evils on the left. And again, we don't need to assign any brilliance to Trudeau for this. We need to really point out how stupid the NDP policy was here. Okay? But that's not what this rant is about. The consequence of this is that, the left of the NDP, which was never going to move to the Liberals, right, is fed up with them, right? And so there's been and is going to probably be an increase of Green Party members coming in from these. Okay, I'm garbling my words here. Let's just read this straight flat out. This influx of Green Party members is coming from leftists that are fed up with the NDP and looking for a new left that is less tied to union activism and more to environmental sustainability. The modern left, the young left, the millennial left, whatever you want to call it, looks at the world and sees capitalism and industrialization as very much intertwined. And like I say, writings by people like Naomi Klein are helping that. It's hard to see a future in union activism when the industry that the unions are attached to are the cause of so many problems. It's not really right-wing propaganda against unions. It's an organic left-wing movement that's saying, how do we get past all these problems that pollution are creating? How do we get past global warming? Union activism doesn't seem to provide a solution to that so much as it seems to uphold the status quo and produce more and more problems. We need to get past that, A new left, a real left, is going to not uphold a system of the sort and just fight for different wage structures, but is going to want to actually revolutionize the system altogether, right? And that's not what the Green Party is right now. It just isn't. But it's what activists want the Green Party to be. And so this is a hostile takeover. And in order for these leftists to do that, which I support, in fact I've argued for it explicitly, in order for the leftists to take over the party like this, they will need to push the libertarians out of it. They will need to push the liberals out of it. And that's good, and that's what we should be pushing for. And there's no other way it can work. May is not one of these libertarians. Like I say, she's a red Tory, a progressive conservative, a right-leaning liberal. But she will have to go with them, okay? That said, what does BDS have to do with the environment? Is May right? Is this just a distraction? This has nothing to do with the Green Party. It's just a bunch of crazy leftists taking over her movement. No. BDS has a lot to do with the environment. And I'd like to see the point raised more often. I would like to see some people in the media explicitly rebut her suggestion that this has nothing to do with the environment, because it has everything to do with the environment. Let's take a step back. Why do we support Israel again? Despite all the human rights atrocities. Despite the bombing of the schools. The reason is that we need a reliable ally. We need to have a reliable ally in the Middle East. Okay? Now, we can have a debate over whether Israel's a reliable ally or not. Apparently they're selling weapons to the Chinese, but it kind of doesn't matter. The perception is that they are, and if we think they are, then they are. From a policy perspective, anyways, right? And as long as we need a reliable ally, we're stuck turning the other way as they commit the genocide in slow motion. Who else is our reliable ally? We might have thought Turkey was a reliable ally. Not anymore. Not after the last couple of weeks, right? And I mean, like we've been carrying out military coups in Turkey for decades. We never saw Turkey as an ally. We saw them as a what's the word I'm looking for here? As a subsidiary state, as a puppet regime. And we've treated them that way. We don't need to get into Turkish history and this whole idea of the military acting as a buffer for this and that, and whether it's actually really the case or it's just an excuse to push through. It just seems a little bit convenient that every time the military has overthrown the results of an election in Turkey, it's very much in American interests. And they couldn't get rid of this guy, and now he's running into the arms of Vladimir Putin. You can only pull these kinds of policies off for so long, right? You can only be the great Satan for so long before people start pushing back. You can only push divide and conquer and chaos and mayhem for so long before people wise up. We point to the Roman Empire as great strategics to tacticians. We forget what happened to the Roman Empire, don't we? And for some reason we can't see that if we follow the policy of the Romans, then we will have the outcome of the Romans. Nonetheless, why do we have to do that again? Why do we need a military base in the Middle East in the first place? Well, the reason is the reliance on Middle Eastern oil, right? If we can remove our reliance on imported energy, then we no longer need that ally in the Middle East. We can throw Israel under the bus. And we shouldn't feel bad. Look what they do, right? So pushing for a green shift to renewables is consequently the most realistic thing that we can do as citizens. To stand in solidarity with the Palestinians and help stop the slaughter that is going on there. So this is hugely interrelated, okay? You could make the argument that pushing for BDS is not going to reduce fossil fuel emissions. Okay. But you're ignoring the reality that the situation in Israel is a consequence of our energy policy. And so it does follow that opposition to BDS is the same thing as support for the fossil fuel industry. I'm going to repeat that. If you're opposing BDS, then you're supporting the fossil fuel industry. And the Greens, at the least, should not be opposing it. And so her position that she's taking is inconsistent with the goals of her party. And I think that if we were to sit down and talk about it, she would admit that. She's maybe just blinded by the propaganda that she grew up with as a child, right? Again, this is a generational thing as well, right? I grew up with a little bit of it, but people that are younger than me didn't grow up with that. To most young people today, the Second World War is ancient history. And you can say, never again, never again. Well, okay. Maybe you could ask Ariel Sharon what never again means. Maybe you could ask Benjamin Netanyahu what never again means. Because as far as I can see, they're doing it again.